and so it is. Alrighty, everyone, I'm going to get a drink of water and we're going to get rolling here. For those who are watching on YouTube, the audio feed to YouTube quit quit about 50 minutes into the talk or so, 50 minutes into the service. So I uploaded a backup audio. The complete file is now up there on YouTube. So if you were with us last week and you lost audio, I apologize. But you can go back now and you can listen to the part that you missed. You can just open the video and kind of scroll forward until you find the part where you got cut off, and then listen to the end. This morning we're picking up again. We're continuing on with some ideas from Frederick Bales. And as I said a few weeks ago when I introduced Ralph Waldo Trine, I think it's important to kind of look at different teachers and different writers and different speakers and the way that people present the same truth, the same basic truth. Right? And that same basic truth is God is all there is. And our spiritual growth consists of creating within our own consciousness a deeper connection to that which already is. Right? So that's kind of, remember I said, if you look at religions as a scientist might, if you look for that, try and call it the silver thread, it's there, see, it's there. In Christianity, Jesus said, seek first the kingdom. The kingdom was within. The kingdom was the experience of the presence of, as he called it, the Father or Spirit. We're all kind of saying the same things, but we're saying them in slightly different ways from time to time and using different examples and different parables, all to try to get to the same point, which is a very simple point to explain. Perhaps not so much to experience, because that's where our practice comes in. And it's one thing to know about it, and it's another thing to experience it. So it's not just enough to know about it. We have to actively engage in our practice if we are to experience the growth. So Trine gave us this beautiful image, and I asked you to try to keep it in mind. And the image was of a farm. Imagine this little pasture land kind of down at the bottom of the hill, and across the top of the hill is an aqueduct, and that aqueduct is carrying pure mountain water from up in the Sierra Nevada, and it's carrying that pure mountain water down to the reservoirs in the cities of California. But along the way there are openings in the aqueduct. There are little water gates, and there's a valve that can be turned, and it can raise or lower a metal plate, go up and down, and controls how much water can be released from that aqueduct and flow into a particular farmer's land. And he gave us the image of a kindly man who left the aqueduct open, so he had a good stream of clear mountain water that flowed down into his land, and it created a beautiful pond, and the pond was full of life, and full of birds, and full of fishes, and full of butterflies, and full of people who would come and just sit there and enjoy nature. And then that man had to go away for a year, and he sublet his land to another fellow who said, I don't want to pay for all this water. What good is it doing me? It's not growing anything. So he cut off the supply of water. And this little oasis that had been there, this beautiful little pond and this beautiful little park that it had created, withered up and died, became stagnant. The pond became stagnant. The vegetation rotted. The fish died. And what Trine was giving us there is an image of you and I. Our life is that pond. See? And whether our life is flourishing or whether our life is growing stagnant, depends upon the flow of the divine force into our life. And you and I are the only ones who can control how much we open that valve. So what Trine tells us is that at the very center of our being, the spiritual nature, the spiritual truth of what we are, is that perfection of the divine, is that omniscience, is that omnipotence. It's all there. See, it's all there. All of God is everywhere present. But then we have the physical aspect of our being, which seems to deny the spiritual, seems to be a total opposite of the spiritual, because we have come to believe that the physical aspect of our being comes from matter, from materialism. And what Trine tells us is the bridge that connects the two is our consciousness, is our thoughts. So what you and I are trying to do in our spiritual growth is we are constantly, Dr. Holmes says stubbornly, deliberately, constantly trying to improve that bridge, trying to improve the quality of our thinking, of our beliefs, of our consciousness, trying to create within our consciousness a greater avenue through which the good that already is may flow into our lives. And Dr. Holmes tells us that's the purpose of what he called spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer. We're not trying to change God in any way, shape, or form, as if we could. We are trying to change that avenue in consciousness that connects us to the divine. So I invited you a few weeks ago to work with that image, to take that image into your meditation, to take that image into your spiritual practice, and in whatever way works for you, see yourself opening that valve. See yourself connecting to a greater flow of the perfection of the divine that is ready, willing, and able to flow into us, you know. Perhaps when you were a child or you took your children to the beach, you know, and they would go play in a little tidal pool, you know, as the tide goes out, sometimes there's like this huge puddle and they get stuck in the beach there. And the little ones go and play in that. It's a safe place for them to play. It's only a couple of inches deep, you know. And the kids would go and they would kind of build a castle, you know, and build a little mud castle. And then as the tide started to come back in, the water would flow all around this castle, you know. So the mud walls would hold the water out and keep the seawater from coming into the castle. But if you take your finger or a stick and you just make a mark anywhere in that wall, it didn't matter where, the water would rush in. The water was ready, it was willing, it was able to enter that space behind it. But it required that little opening. It required that little opening. You and I are creating deliberately creating that opening through our spiritual practice. Now, Frederick Bales approaches the same subject, and he gives it, you know, he kind of explains it a little bit differently because of his background. He was studying in medicine. He was studying to be a medical missionary. So he tends to relate things more to the working of the natural world. You know, he talks a lot about, in this chapter that we're working from today, he said, you know, the universe as we see it is a demonstration of intelligence at work. Think about that. A demonstration of intelligence at work. So fascinating when we read about and go to the images of the Hubble and we look out into deep space and we just see how vast and how marvelous this entire universe is. And everything is in its place and everything seems to be working according to natural law. Gravity, relativity, whatever it is. Things are the way they are because they're complying with a natural law. And he brings that down into very nature itself. The miracle that the human body is. Millions or billions of cells are created every minute in our body. Millions or billions of old cells fade away in our body. The bodies that we have today are not the same bodies that we had 2 years ago. Every cell, even the bones, every cell, we were told, has been replaced. Clearly we can see that, if we look at pictures of ourselves when we were a child, You remember learning how to ride a bicycle when you were a child? You remember falling off the bike and skinning your knee, Well, that knee is gone. That skin is gone. The body of that little child that was learning how to ride the bike is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It has turned into dust. And yet you and I are still here, and we are still aware. And we still remember being there, and we still remember falling off that bike. So the we that we are is not our physical body. We are the observer. We are the witness. We are the consciousness. So in this work, Bales is encouraging us to consider the laws by which nature works, by which the universe works, by which God works, and our relationship with all of that. And it's not hard to find inspiration, The trees give off the oxygen. We give off the carbon dioxide. We are two parts of the same whole. And how could that work if there was not some sort of an intelligence that is behind it? Even if it's a chemical intelligence, there's an intelligence there. There's a harmony there. There's a unity there. And all of life works together to support all of life. We were watching a show yesterday on Netflix about biodiversity on the planet and just how intricate and entangled everything is. Everything, every part of life on this planet works together for the benefit of the whole. I think I told you a few months ago I was reading an article about reintroducing the wolves to Yellowstone Park. Of course, human beings had driven the wolves out through hunting years ago. But they started to reintroduce the wolves into Yellowstone Park. And what they found is that not only did the wolves thrive, but the buffalo that they hunted also thrived. The herds got stronger as the weaker and the older and the sicker buffaloes were culled out. But not only did the buffalo herds get stronger, the streams got stronger. Because what had happened is when the wolves weren't there, the animals, the hooved animals, would walk right down to the water's edge to drink. And they would destroy the vegetation on the banks of the stream, and then mud would fall into the stream, and that mud would cloud up the stream, and it would destroy the fish habitat. And what they found is that the fish population increased. The water cleared up. And it was just a whole range of effects that they never expected. The vegetation growing along the riverbanks started to change. It started to come back to the way it used to be. Everything is connected in an intricate way, in ways that we don't understand. And this is what Bales is asking us to think about. If we just stop and think about how magnificent life is, we start to feel, we start to get in awe, we get in awe of the magnificence of the divine. So Bale says we have to start to think about what the divine is and how the divine works and our relationship to that. And the reason we have to identify with that, we have to realize that that is what we are. Now, we are not saying that we are all that God is, but what we are saying is that everything that we are comes from the divine. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, well, what about the evil? What about the bad things that people do? Well, it's just like the sunlight shining through the glass darkly, as St. Paul tells us. The light is okay. It has been distorted as it passes through the glass darkly. Our consciousness provides the avenue through which that perfection shines. And if our consciousness is distorted, our actions are distorted, our behaviors are distorted, and we do terrible things to one another. Wars and those sorts of things. But that doesn't mean that the divine isn't good. That doesn't mean that we are not good. It just means that we are always expressing. We are always expressing that divine life according to our level of consciousness, according to our level of understanding. Not in this chapter, but somewhere in this book or one of Bale's other books, he gives the example of a business executive who came to his church in California, and the man was very stressed out. And he went to see Dr. Bales for counseling, and he just said, I can't stop worrying. He says, I'm worrying all the time. I go to work all day. I worry about all the things that are going on at work. I come home at night, and I continue to worry about all the things that could go wrong at work. I can't sleep at night because I'm worried. He says it's affecting my health, And Bale said, well, what do you think your life would be like if you knew that that there was enough intelligence, there was enough power, there was enough resources, that all of the ideas that you needed, all those things that you need to run your business, that they were yours? Would you worry? And the guy said, no, I wouldn't. Why would I worry? Because I would know that I was more than enough. So Dr. Bales asked him, he says, is there any time in your life, is there any time during the day or the week, is there any time that you experience a sense of peace and of poise and of power and of calm? Excuse me, I'm getting a drink of water. And the man said yes. And of course, remember, they lived on the West Coast, so the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, or behind the Pacific Ocean. And the man said yes. He said at night when I watch the sun go down into the ocean, if you're standing there on the shore, it looks like the sun goes right into the ocean. He says, when I see the sunset, when I experience the sunset, he says, there's just something about that is powerful, that is peaceful, that it's just awesome. And Bale said to him, he says, yes. He says, now, what you need to do is identify with that. The same power is within you. The intelligence that keeps that sun in orbit, or keeps the earth in orbit around the sun, is within you. All of the wisdom that created the universe is within you. You must identify with it. You must identify with it. So our spiritual growth is one of increasing our level of identification, our level of understanding, our level of belief, and most importantly, our level of experience that the love and the presence and the power are right here, are right now, and they are accessible to us. Okay? So last week I asked you to consider if we were in a sci-fi movie and we were the protagonist in the plot and we were put into this room and we were told that in this room was the most powerful computer that human beings had ever built. And the computer had the ability to solve any problem that we could think of, pandemics and wars and climate change and whatever problems there might be. This computer had the ability to generate the information that we needed to know, to build whatever, to come up with clean sources of energy, whatever you can think of, whatever problem you could say that humankind is facing, hunger, poverty, sickness, all of these things. This computer has the information, has access, has the ability to solve all these problems. And all you have to do in order to help yourself and help the world is to learn how to work with that computer, to learn how to speak the language that that computer speaks. What would you do? Would you go back to doing whatever it was before? Would you go back to watching TV or reading books or doing all the other things that we do in our normal life? Or would you dedicate yourself to trying to figure out how to access that computer, how to program that computer, how to interface with that computer? And in our screenplay here, we would dedicate ourselves to that. See, this is how the plot in the movies work. Is people would dedicate themselves to figuring out how to work with that computer, and there would be all kinds of problems and all kinds of obstacles that would get in their way, and then eventually they would figure it out, and the world would be saved. That's the story arc that we love in our culture, in drama. There's got to be a problem that has to be solved. There's got to be obstacles along the way, and finally it gets solved, and everybody lives happily ever after. But this isn't a screenplay. This is life. See, we have within us, we have available to us omniscience, omnipotence, poise, peace, power, and health. But we have to make our connection. We have to learn how to communicate. We have to learn how to program that computer. So what Bales asks us to consider is if we think of the divine mind, if we think of the divine as a conscious intelligence, it seems to function on three levels. The objective level has will, has volition, has choice, has intention. Right? And this is given to us in the example of the book of Genesis. It said, in the beginning was this chaos, and spirit moved upon the waters and said, let there be. There was intention. That is the function of the objective part, sometimes called spirit. But then there's another part that acts in a subjective manner. Now, when he's talking about subjective manner, he means it does not have a will or volition of its own to choose to ignore the intention of the objective mind. It has the will and volition to figure out how to bring about the intention of the objective mind. But it doesn't have the freedom of choice to refuse to bring about whatever it is that Spirit says, whatever the objective part of the divine says. So if the divine says, let there be light, for example, which, by the way, that word as it was used in the Aramaic meant enlightenment, consciousness. Let there be consciousness. This is why we have light on one day and the sun a couple days later. Let there be consciousness. And you can see that the steps that took place over billions of years of evolution, from single-celled animals to multi-celled animals, to plants, to fish, to mammals, to human beings. And we can see that every kind of iteration of evolution, consciousness is expanding. It is growing. It is becoming more aware of its environment. And then finally it reaches self-consciousness. Excuse me again, I need some more water. Self-consciousness, self-awareness. Of being capable of knowing that it knows, of knowing that it thinks. And yet we don't know what thought is, you see. We don't know what thinking is. We say we think, we say we have mind, we say we have ideas, but we really don't know what they are. We really don't know how they get there. Remember last week I told you I was working on something and I was trying to my intention was to understand how to fit this particular apparatus together. Excuse me. And what I noticed was, as I was doing other things, I started to get pictures, mental images, as if something somewhere, or someone somewhere, or part of me somewhere was showing me ideas. It could go together this way, it could go together that way, you could do this, you could do that. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Just observing. I had an intention. I wanted to know. And then something, somewhere, seemed to be giving me answers. Seemed to be giving me the answers. So the divine mind has an intention. The objective part of the divine mind has an intention. Let there be. And then something brings about that intention. Something makes it so. So Dr. Holmes gives us the example to help us understand this relationship between objective and subjective mind. Excuse me again. Suppose you and I wanted to plant a garden. We go out and we till up the yard and we fertilize it and we put in organic material to help it drain better. We do all of the things that we need to do to prepare the soil. But then we pick a seed. So let's say we pick a tomato. We want to have tomatoes this year. So we go ahead and we get a packet of tomato seeds and we read the instructions and we understand how deep, how far apart we need to plant these seeds. And we go ahead and we put these seeds in the ground and we cover them up according to instructions and we water them according to instructions. Excuse me. We do all those things that we need to do because our intention is to have tomatoes. That's what we intend. Now there's an intelligence in that seed. There's an intelligence in that soil. The two of them somehow know how to work together. Now I'm not saying that they talk to one another like in the cartoons, but there's a chemical intelligence there. There's something that knows exactly what to do when the temperature is exactly right, when the moisture is exactly right. That seed starts to sprout. And it sends a little shoot up through the dirt, and it sends little roots out into the dirt to bring in minerals, And here's a miracle, right? So it takes sunlight, and it takes minerals, and it converts them into a tomato plant. It converts them into tomatoes. And then you and I eat the tomatoes, and it converts that into our bodies. You see, all is connected somehow, or we couldn't eat the tomato. we wouldn't be able to digest it. But what Dr. Holmes is telling us is the soil doesn't say, now wait a minute, Jim. You know tomatoes give you heartburn. I don't think you should have tomatoes. I think what you really need is you need spinach. So even though you planted tomato seeds, I'm going to give you spinach. The subjective cannot do that. The subjective says, you set your intention, you gave me the seed for tomatoes, I must give you back tomatoes. So the divine mind has an objective factor, which we call spirit, will, volition, choice, intention. And then it has a subjective factor, which takes the direction, does not change the direction, but takes the direction and is intelligent enough to figure out how to make it so. If there's not enough moisture in the soil, it won't sprout the seed. If it's too cold, it won't sprout the seed. But when everything is just right, the Goldilocks theory of life, when everything is just right, that tomato seed will sprout. So the subjective part is intelligent, and it knows what to do and when to do it and how to do it, but it doesn't alter the intention that is given to it. And then the third aspect is the physical demonstration, the physical manifestation, the tomato plant, the tomato itself. So we have the intention, and then something happens. You know, the old cloud charts we used to have, it said here a miracle occurs, right? Something happens, it goes into the cloud, and out of the cloud comes this tomato. So this is what Baal sees, you know, if we go back and we look at the language of Genesis, when it says, and God said, let there be, there was. And God said, let there be, and there was. So what Baal is telling us to consider is that because we are made by the divine in the image and likeness of the divine, and because we are in fact one with the divine, not separated from, not apart from, not different than, because we are it expressing its life as us through the degree of consciousness that we give it, that all of this is true for us as well. That we are connected, that the consciousness that we have, the reason that we can think, the reason that we have intellect, is because divine love has given it to us. And on the subjective side, we are connected with all of creation. All of creation. Not just our own wits and our own knowledge and our own education and our own experience and our own ability to do things. But there is a part of us that is connected to everything, to all intelligence, to all wisdom. And this is why I was mentioning Tesla a couple weeks ago, who said that the inventions came to him as a revelation in completion. It was like this was an already completed somewhere. He intended to know about it, and the answer revealed itself to him. So we have to stop being small in terms of thinking, I have to figure this all out by myself. I have to do this all myself. We have to understand how the universe works, and therefore, because we are part of that universe, how we work. What is your intention? Do you know how to sow that seed of your intention into the creative soil of the universe, which was what Holmes called mind, right? The fertile ground, the subjective. And then do you know how to reap the harvest? Do you know how to accept the demonstration, to receive the demonstration when it occurs to us? So Bales is asking us to consider, when it comes to health, just look in nature. You know, if a branch falls off of a tree, a burrow forms. There's a healing that occurs there, right? If you go look at some old trees, there's these little big things, you know, as big as your fist or bigger, depending on how big the branch was. But this branch falls off the tree, and the tree, there's something there. There's an intelligence there that knows exactly what to do to heal it. He says in the wild, if an animal is hurt in the wild, if a bird hurts its wing, or an animal is somehow injured, it goes someplace and it rests, and healing occurs. There's an intelligence right there at work that knows what to do to restore health to that animal, because the health is the normal, natural condition. Everything the divine makes perfectly. Health is the normal, natural condition. He says in days of old, you know, before there were doctors everywhere, and when the frontier people would go way out far from civilization, if somebody was injured, they would go hole up for a while. Excuse me. They would go rest somewhere, and the natural healing process would take over until their health was restored. And we see that when we were kids and we fell off our bike, skinned our knees, you know. We could see that. We could see the healing take place. Dr. Bill Hornaday was an associate of Ernest Holmes, and he tells a story about one day Ernest was out with hedge clippers trimming the hedges, and he nicked his finger, and it was bleeding, and he held his finger up, and he said, Bill, look at this. And Bill said, oh my goodness, you know, I'll go get a Band-Aid. And Ernest said, no, look at this. This is the miracle of health. It's right here. And in a little bit of time, the blood started to coagulate, and the flow closed down. You know, in a little bit more time, a scab formed over the wound to protect it while new cells were developed. And then, you know, maybe a week or so later, the skin had perfectly healed itself. You know, everything was just as it was. Now, Ernest didn't have to know how that happened. He did not have to direct that. He did not have to scrunch up his eyes and send his willpower to it. He just let it be. See, he just let it be. And I think this is important for us to remember when we are building our bridge in consciousness to the divine, right? When we are opening ourselves up to a greater influx and inflow of the divine healing to us, we don't have to force it. There's no struggle, right? Dr. Holmes tells us if we are doing our spiritual practice and we get a headache, we're not doing it right. There's no struggle. When you open the valve, the water flows. You don't have to push it with a paddle. It flows. It flows because that's what it's supposed to do. So what we are trying to do, what we are all trying to say, what we are all trying to point to is that evolution, physical, mental evolution, has taken human beings as far as it can take us. Take a step back. I love those little animations they have where they show planet Earth as it looked hundreds of millions of years ago, and there's one big continent, and they move over time and all these different things. But take a step back and think about how life has advanced from single-celled animals to multi-celled animals, you know, to fish, to plants, to mammals, to the apes, that at every step of the way, there was a greater degree of intelligence, consciousness, and a greater degree of freedom, of mobility, every step of the way. The single-celled animals in the oceans, they just had to float along, right? They didn't have flippers to push. They just kind of floated along. But as life has evolved, it has been pushing forward. It has been driving to this point of a being capable of self-awareness. That is us, capable of self-awareness, capable of recognizing our connection with the unity of all life. But now that we have stepped across that threshold, the rest is up to us. Evolution can take us no further. We have to enter, as Thomas Troward said, the fifth kingdom. We have to become those spiritual beings that we are. We have to become aware of that. We have to practice that. The choice is ours. We can continue to live life as a material being by the law of averages, by the law of chance, by the law of probability, or we can deliberately turn within to build that bridge in consciousness to that healing source, to that calming source, to that loving source that is our true spiritual nature. This is our practice. This is our life. As Wendy gave us in that opening quote, when things all around us are dark, turn within. The light's within. The light is within. And you may just be the light. You may just be the one to let the light shine through you and as you into your own physical being, through your health, and into the world around you. Now, if we have come far enough to say, okay, so there's this thing called the divine, and it is perfect, it is whole, it is complete, it knows everything there is to know, it can do everything there is to do, and I am part of that, and my expression of that depends upon this bridge of thoughts, of beliefs, of consciousness that I must deliberately create because it cannot create itself for me. It has invited me, but I must answer that invitation. If we've come that far, then the next step is, okay, how do I do that? Or the next step is, I don't believe any of that. Like in the movie The Matrix, where the guy says, just put me back into the dream and make sure I never wake up. And what we are going to find is that what the spiritual teachers of all time have told us is that there's this thing called faith that builds that bridge. But the normal definition of faith is something that you really shouldn't believe because it doesn't make any sense, but you believe it anyway. You have no reason to believe it. It's just a matter of faith. This is the way I learned it as a child. And I'm not talking about that kind of faith at all. Dr. Holmes speaks of faith as a knowing so certainly that doubt cannot enter our minds. Now, when you woke up this morning, did you have any doubt in your mind that gravity wasn't going to be working today. I would say, unless you've been taking some kind of medication or other mind-altering substance, probably not. Probably not. I chuckle because I knew a man who said he never called someone drunk unless they were holding on to the grass to keep from falling off the world. We never think that we're going to fall off the world. We don't wake up in the morning and hold on to the side of the bed and say, is it okay to let go? I might float up to the ceiling. We have perfect faith in gravity. We have a knowing so certain that any idea to the opposite cannot enter our mind. And that kind of faith can be developed. It can be developed with our practice. And that's where we're going to pick it up next week. We're going to continue on with Frederick Bales and Ernest Holmes. And we're going to be talking about spiritual practice, developing faith, building our bridge in consciousness to the love, to the perfection, to the goodness that already exists. So I invite you this week, take time in whatever way works for you. Take time to feel the love. Take time to feel the presence. Take time to open your heart and connect with the divine. I love Joel Goldsmith's teachings. He just says, your servant is listening. Your servant is listening. Set your intention to experience God to a greater degree. Experience the divine, whatever name you want to call it. Experience it to a greater degree. Set your intention. And then pay attention. Intention, attention. Set your intention to know more of the divine, to experience more of the divine, and then pay attention to what flows through your life, through your consciousness, through your experience. Life has created you for that purpose. It will not disappoint you.